Hello. Today we're going to make a carousel that works a little bit like this here on the screen. And we're going to make it using HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. After we've done with the basic functionality, we're going to talk about how to make it accessible, because that's extremely important for web developers today. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how you would test something like this. All right, so as with all projects, we're going to start out by creating a folder for it. So I will just create a new folder here and I will call it Carousel. And then we're going to open our code editor. So I'm going to come over to VS Code. This is VS Code here, and I'll go to File, Open Folder. I will paste the path to the folder, and we will open the folder, and now we can get started. So as usual, we will start with just the basic HTML file. So that's index.html. Okay, so now that we're here, I'll just create a little HTML boilerplate. So in VS Code, it has a nice shortcut for that. You do exclamation mark, and then you just click on this, and it generates the little HTML head and things like that for you. And I'll just change the title and call it Carousel like this. And just so we can see that what we're doing is actually working properly, I'll just create a heading here and I'll call it Carousel. Okay. Now, as for actually connecting this to our page, so I'll open a tab here. I'll open a tab over here. And what we'll do is we'll go to the folder where we have this file and drag it into Chrome so that we can see what we're working on. It's going to appear on Chrome. So here's the folder. I'm going to go into it and drag index.html, place it here, and now we can see our heading and the HTML title. So we're connected fine. Okay, that's great. Now let's actually start making the carousel. So I'm going to make an empty div to start with the class of carousel, because we're going to use CSS to style it, of course. In this little shortcut, I've got dot and then the word carousel here. It's an emmet shortcut. It's going to change the text to this, right? So if I click on that, so what it does is it creates an empty div with the class of carousel. So it's just a nice little convenient shortcut. Now in the carousel, if we look at our completed project, we have the buttons, right? And we also have multiple slides. So how I like to group those up is to create an additional div for the buttons. I'll call that carousel buttons. And then we're going to have our buttons here, both of them. So I will have carousel button and two of these, right? And one of them is going to be the previous button, obviously. And the other one is going to be the next button. Now, just for now, I'm going to use text so that we can actually see them appearing. We know what we're doing. So here they are. In fact, I should probably zoom in a bit here so you can see it easily as well. So these are our buttons for now. And of course, we're going to have a div for the slides. And then in here, we're going to have multiple slides, right? So we'll have slide 1, 2, 3, and so on. So before we move on to the CSS, I would like to get the icons here. So I'm actually using Font Awesome, which I think is pretty cool to use for things like this. Even better would be like using an SVG icon, I think, but we're not going to do that for this simple tutorial. We're just going to use Font Awesome. So what do we do? So we can go to the Font Awesome website. Now I've already opened it up here. But if we're at the home page, two things. First of all, we need to import it into our project. Now, how I'm going to import it is I've opened up a CDN for Font Awesome. Okay, so how you do this is you go to Google, you write down Font Awesome CDN, right? And a few options pop up for you to use. This one popped up on mine. So if I go back one sec, Font Awesome CDN here. I go to the first link and I take this file over here. I copy the link tag, paste it into the project. And now we should have Font Awesome imported into our project. Now to actually get an icon, you just go to Font Awesome over here and you click on, there's an option to search icons here. I think I might need the window a bit larger first. Here we go, search icons. we want an arrow. Specifically, I'm using the chevrons. So I'll type chevron here. And these are the ones we're using. So we want a circle left. We click on this. It gives us the HTML to copy. So now that we've copied the HTML, paste it in here, add a little bit of spacing so that we can read the thing easier. And for the next one as well. So I go back and I select the right arrow. Same thing, click on here, which copies the HTML, create a little space here, paste the HTML, save, go to our project, refresh, and now we have the icons. So that's great. One quick thing before moving on is that the I tag has a particular semantic meaning. VS Code is nice enough to bring it up for us over here. It represents a span of text in an alternative voice or mood, right? It represents text that's almost pronounced differently, so to speak. But this isn't the purpose of the icons, okay? So the purpose of the icons is just to be a visual indicator of something. It's not an eye, right? That's a span. A span is for visual stuff, a visual, it's like an inline div, right? It doesn't have special semantic meaning. So we're going to replace the eye with a span instead. Now save the work, refresh, everything still works. So that's cool. Now, just so we can kind of see what we're doing, for every slide, I'll just create a tiny bit of content in here. It's not gonna really be anything. I'll just create a heading for now, right? We'll say slide 1 here. And I think I'll just copy this, paste it twice, and say slide 2, slide 3 again, just so we can kind of have something on the screen. Okay, so we've come this far, that's good. Now let's actually use some CSS to style the stuff. So to start with, I'll create an additional file here for our CSS, index.css I'll call it. Link it up in the head, index.css over here. And just so we can make sure that it's actually connected, I'm going to do something quite obvious here. We're going to give the entire body a background of pink and refresh the page. Okay, and it has the background, it means we're connected. That's cool. Now first I'll do some extremely basic styles. We're going to give every HTML and body a margin of 0 so that this carousel thing is at the very left, right? You'll see here this cap will disappear, so I'll refresh the page and it's at the very left now. That's what we want. And now let's move on to styling the rest. Okay, so we start with the carousel. Okay, the main div of the carousel that we're working on. Now what we want for this is we want to give it a width of 100%, which means it's going to take up the entire width that, the parent has given to it. We also, because we're with this kind of effect, right, what we're doing is like this slide here, when we click right, it's over at the left here, right? It's been positioned absolute and to the left, right? And then when we click go there, it moves from here that way, over here. So basically, we're using position absolute. For that reason, we're going to give this position relative so that if we have a child element with position absolute, it will have absolute positioning like starting from the parent, so to speak. If our carousel starts down here, right, not at the very top, a child element of our carousel, absolutely positioned, will be over here, right? It will be like the location of the closest parent with position relative. So that's why we do that. And then the key thing about the carousel is that we want everything that's to the side, we want it hidden. Okay, we don't want it visible. So what we do is we put down overflow hidden. Yeah. Next, we style the carousel buttons, each one individually. So we have carousel button, we have carousel button for the common styles, and then we need to have a little bit different styling for each button because one goes on the left, one goes on the right. So what we want for the buttons is we want to give them position absolute, because they'll be floating to the left and the right, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to have them in the middle of the slide, like vertically. So, from the top to the bottom, they will be at the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to give them a top of 50%, okay, which means, yeah, well, I'm pretty sure you know what that means. And we're going to do the trick where we give them a transform of translate y minus 50%. So what this does, I'll have to kind of try and show you here. Let me give the carousel button a font size of like 5 rem, just so I can illustrate what this does. So if you can see this is quite big over here. Okay, now I'll also give the carousel a background of pink so that we can see exactly what takes up the carousel. Okay, now you can see with the CSS we have now, the button, this huge button, it's a little bit weird because it's like conflicting with the other one. Let me just like disable one of them. So comment that out. You can see that this button is in the middle of the slide, okay? Vertically at least. But if we disable this, it's not in the middle anymore, right? And the reason for that is because top 50%, this line over here, makes it start in the middle. So this point where it starts is the middle of the carousel. But, obviously, because this has a height, it starts at the middle, but we want its center to be in the middle. So what this transform translate y minus 50% does is it says translate means move, right? Move. So this says move y, basically half of its height. So this center here, right? If this is the whole height, this is half of the height over here. It's going to move this distance up, if that makes sense. And then that's why this is in the middle. Anyway, so that's why we have that. Now, of course, for each button, we want one to the left, we want one to the right. And while we're at it, let me disable these extreme font sizes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them each a modifier class so that we can style each one of them differently. So this one's going to have carousel button previous because it's the previous button. This one is going to have carousel button next. And then over here, for the carousel button previous, we don't need to do anything. It's already at the correct location. But for the carousel button next, we'll give it a right of 0, which will basically push it all the way to the end. Okay? Okay, so the location is correct. Now let's just give it a bit of more polish. Let's do a few more things like add the padding of 0, add a little bit of a margin so it's not at the very edge of the carousel, right? We added a little bit of a margin here so that like all around. Give it a font size of 1.5 rem, something like that. And for the mouse, we want it to have the little hand icon. So we'll do that with cursor pointer, just like that. And finally, just for good measure, let's give it a Z index of 1 so that it's above the slides that we're going to have later. Okay, now another thing I'd like to do is give it a little bit of a hover effect. So let's go here, do carousel button hover. And let's just make it change the color a little bit. So color. So this makes it a little bit transparent. Just like that. And just for extra flavor, let's give it a little transition. So what transition does is it doesn't make the color change instant. It gives it a tiny bit of delay. So it's very small, so it's not super visible, but say I make this 0.9 instead. you can see it takes a while for the color to change. So that's what we have there. Okay, and as for when we have a bigger screen size, let's add a little media query. We'll make the font size slightly bigger and give it a slightly bigger margin so that when it's a little bit bigger, it grows in size just a little bit. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's move on to the slides. So first we have the slides container. Okay, and what we want with this is, as I said, we kind of want one slide to be here visible and only one slide. All right, and I need to remove the background pink. So one slide visible, and the other slides should basically be like off screen. Okay, so like one slide here, off screen somewhere, and maybe even to the right off screen. Okay, how we're going to do that is we need to have them all, you know, like here. They can't be vertically on top of each other like they are here. They need to be to the left. So I'm going to make the div display flex, because that's what display flex does. If it doesn't wrap, it just puts everything horizontally next to each other. Now the slides container also needs to have a width of 100%. It needs to take up the whole space that it's given. And that should be good enough for now. Let's see what we have. Okay, yeah, this is good. And then for every individual slide, okay, each individual slide also needs a width of 100%, and it's because it has display flex, right? We need to give it the flex property. So we're going to do 0, 0, which means do not expand or contract, just have 100%, okay? And the percent is in the wrong way because that's how I did it. And now if we look, so slide 1 takes up the entirety of this little thing, okay? If I give it, yeah, now slide 2 is to the right off screen, and slide 3 is to the right of that. Okay, so that's what we want. This is all good. And just to show you how we're going to have our carousel working, if we translate this, the slides container to the left, so that's with transform, then we're going to do translate X, which is horizontally, and say we translated 100% to the left, and we refresh the page and we see slide 2 here, right? If we translate just a little bit more, say 110%, we see, it's kind of moving to the left, as you can see. Here is slide 2, and here is slide 3 beginning to show. So that is how, essentially, we're going to do our carousel functionality. We're going to use CSS to translate this container, this slides div, to the left or to the right. Now I'll comment this out for now. I don't like leaving commented code, but we will be editing this very shortly, so it's okay. Next, let's do some of our JavaScript. So we're going to create a new JavaScript file here. I'll just call it index.js. Okay, we don't care about that, that's fine. And as usual, let's make sure we're connected properly. So I'll just do an alert here, say hello, and we want to see this appear on the screen. At the bottom here, we're going to connect our JavaScript. So we have script, and the source is index.js over here. So now I refresh the page, we see our alert, so we know we're connected. Okay, that's cool. So we don't need that anymore. Okay, so essentially, what we need to do is when we click on one of these buttons, we need to translate horizontally the slides container, the slides div. So we need a few things from that. We need to be able to grab the buttons with JavaScript, and we also need to be able to grab the slides div with JavaScript. So to do that, we're going to give both of them some data attributes so we can grab them. So we come to the HTML here, we go to the button div. Oh, how silly. Actually, this should be a button. It has no reason to be a div because, well, it's a button, right? So I'll just change this quickly as well. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, I forgot about that. It has those weird things. So let's just give it a tiny bit more styling quickly. So we gave it border radius 50% to turn it into a circle. We gave it a border of none so that it doesn't have a border, obviously. And the background color transparent, why I added that was because, unfortunately, because we're using a font awesome thing, as you can see, it has a tiny bit of whatever that is, margin or padding, whatever it is. But I don't want to go in and edit the font awesome class, so I'll just make this transparent. There we have our buttons, and they're actual legitimate buttons now, not divs anymore. Back to what we're doing. So we're going to give the button a data attribute so that we can grab it. So just to make this a little bit easier to see as well, I'm going to put these each in a separate line. And the data attribute for it is going to be something like data carousel. Let's call it button previous, because we're going to have a previous and a next one, right? And then over here, we'll do a similar thing. We'll give it data carousel button next. Now you may be asking, why don't I just grab bits of these buttons using the CSS class, right? So if we go to the JavaScript, we could do const button next, right? Query selector, and then class button carousel button next, I believe it was, right? Something like that. You may be asking, why don't I just do that? Why don't we just grab it with a CSS class? And that's because that mixes concerns. That class is for CSS, okay? It is not for JavaScript. And tomorrow, if you're working in a professional company, right, you have your CSS designer that is like, you know what? I don't like this class name because, well, whatever it is, it's not really the next button, it is the next slide button or something. So they rename it to next slide. And of course, it's going to work for them because they're working in the CSS, okay? Then they rename it to the next slide, they change it here as well. But they do CSS, they don't remember, they may not know that your JavaScript depends on this class because classes are for CSS, right? That's what they're for. They're not there for JavaScript. They're the main way we do CSS. The main correct way, according to the majority of web developers in the world, I would assume. So classes are for CSS. They're not for JavaScript because you may forget to change the JavaScript, or the person who's going to change the CSS will not even know that the JavaScript also needs to be changed, and now you've broken stuff. So that's why in your code base you have separate stuff for separate stuff. Classes are for CSS. For JavaScript, you pick one. I like data attributes. You can also have IDs or something, except then you can't target multiple things. So I prefer data attributes for grabbing things with JavaScript. So this is our data attribute. I'll just copy it to make it easy to put in here. And how you have to do data attributes in JavaScript is you have to put them in square brackets. So here we have. Now we're going to do the same for button previous. And of course, the data attribute for that one is previous, not next. And just to make sure that, once again, I'm targeting the correct thing, I'll just give them a very quick event listener. So button next.add event listener. On click, and we're going to do something like console.log clicked. Okay. Now let's see here. Make this a little bit bigger. Open up the console so that we can see our console log. Refresh the page. Query selectors not defined. Okay. Yes, that's my bad. That's supposed to be document.query selector. Same thing here. Click. Okay. and clicked. So we are connected on that one. Let's do it for button previews. Refresh. Okay, great. So we're connected on both of them. We also needed to grab the slides container. So the slides container will also need the data attribute. So we come here, slides. Once again, let's put these on their own line so that they're easier to see. I'm going to give it data, let's say data carousel slides container or something. Copy this. And once again, we have in square brackets as before. And it's slides container without the spaces over there. Yeah, like this. And just, to check that we're doing this correctly, let's do the basic thing we'll be doing in our JavaScript. Let's translate it to the left and see that we're actually doing things correctly. So let's do slides container dot style dot transform. I believe it is, and we will give it the CSS attribute of translate x, say minus 10%. And let's see what that does. Okay, so now if we refresh, yes, and it's working. As you can see, the thing is translating. So we have the correct idea in mind. This is the kind of thing we're going to do. Okay, so now we have everything we need to get started. So what we need to do is, for when we click the button, we need to add an event handler to handle that click, okay? So it's going to be something like a function named handle next or something. Handle next. Or of course it could be handle next slide or whatever it is we want. And we also need to remember what slide we're on, okay? To know how much to sort of translate it to the left or the right. So we will keep a variable here, let current slide, which of course will start at 0, will be on the first slide when we start, right? And then, okay, the next thing we need to talk about is how we're actually going to translate the thing. So I did show you a little bit here of something we can do. We can do something like translate 10%. Yeah, so that's basically exactly what we're going to do. We're going to translate 100% times like sort of how many slides to the right we are, if that makes sense, right? So if we're on slide 0, right, it's going to be something like, if I sort of steal this code, we're on slide 0, okay, it's going to be translate by 0%, something like this. So I've changed this to backticks so that we can use this kind of expression in here. So it's going to be something like current slide times by, what is it, minus, let's say minus 100%. Okay, so if we're on slide 0, this will be 0, so it's going to be 0%. If we're on slide 1, it's going to be 1 times minus 100, so it's going to be at minus 100%, and so on, okay? So when we click on handle next, we need to change current slide to the next one, right? So current slide plus equals 1 or current slide plus plus, whatever you want. And then we need to do this transform thing. So let's try that out. Oh, sorry, we also need to actually add an event listener for it, of course, right? So on button next dot add event listener, on click, we do handle next. So when we click this, it will run this function. Let's have a go. Okay, so that's working now. That's instant because we don't have a transition. And of course, the last thing, when we reach the end slide, everything breaks. Well, okay, actually it doesn't break. It just keeps moving everything to the left, right? But we have nothing here, obviously. But it's working. Let's start the transition so that we can see what we're doing a little bit easier. So over here on our CSS, on our slides container, let's add transition. It will be transform is the property we want to animate. Let's give it something like 0.5 seconds. So now, if we have a look, we can see a nice smooth movement. That's exactly what we want. This is quite good. I like it. Now, as a final thing, as a little simplification for this, I'm going to do something interesting. Instead of writing this text here, right? Slides container.style.transform, translate text. This is a lot of CSS. Okay, so we have the transform property, translate whatever on the slides container. Our JavaScript needs to know a lot about how our HTML and CSS works. Okay, it needs to know that it's the slides container that it needs to act on. It needs to know that it needs to change the transform property. It needs to know that it needs to change translate text by the current slide this much %. This is bad because in the future, we may decide, we don't want to use transform. Let's use position absolute, right? Or something, and left, right? Let's use left minus 100%. Say, because that's a solution we could have had instead for this video. So we might change our HTML and our CSS. Our JavaScript won't work anymore. We're also going to have to change the JavaScript. This is not what you want to do. In programming, in software in general, you always want to make changes easy and safe. Okay, if you change the CSS, it shouldn't oh, the JavaScript broke. You didn't even know there was JavaScript. You were just trying to do a bit of styling. The JavaScript broke, the website's broken. If you're working in a big company like any of the big names, you're expected to make software that is easy to change and safe to change and all that stuff. So this is okay. What we have here is okay, if that's the only way we can do it. But there is a better way. We can do something interesting. We can use CSS variables, CSS custom properties rather. So we come over here, we do something like this. Bear with me. Okay, so we have, what do we have? We have, let's create a CSS variable. The correct name is custom property, but I'll just call them variables because they're easier. We'll say current slide. Okay, and we'll start at 0. Okay. Now, down here, we can do, oh, this doesn't need to be commented out. We can do this cool thing. What's this? So we can say transform, translate text. And what we want to do is we want to do minus 100%, like we have here, times by the current slide, if that makes sense. Now, that's not the correct syntax. We need var here. We want to do something like this. So this is exactly the same thing we're doing in JavaScript. We're doing minus 100% times by current slide, right over here. Minus 100% times by current slide. So we delete this. All we do is we grab our slides container and we do .style.set property, and it is current slide is what we named it, and then the JavaScript value for it, so current slide. So just to prove to you first that this actually works, let's refresh the page. And it's not working, it's broken. Let's see, what have we done? Okay, so what we've done is here I have the wrong variable name. Let's try again. No. Again here, it's supposed to be that. Right, silly mistake. I'm supposed to use calc here. Obviously, I'm sure you know this already. If you're going to do calculations in CSS like we're doing here, it actually needs the calc thing, right? So in here, we can put 100% times by a particular number. So let's try again. Okay, and there we are. All right. So the other great thing is that we don't actually need to set this property on the slides container. We can set it on the carousel, okay, which is very good because, as we said, we don't want our JavaScript to know the little details of how the HTML and the CSS works. We want it to know as little as possible. So we'll use our carousel instead. So of course we have to come here and give it a way to select it. We'll just say data carousel. We will, since we no longer need the slides container, we'll just kind of replace that. So we'll go here, we'll just say carousel instead. And we'll change the selector with the data carousel, the new thing we have. So this is updated nicely now. And let's try it out. So I refresh the page and it's working. Okay, so that's great. Next, of course, we have to do the previous button. So let's say function handle previous. And of course, we will do a similar thing here. I'll just copy this code for now because it's similar as before. And we will do minus equals this time, right? So we go backwards and exactly the same property over here. So let's try it. So I will refresh the page. I will go forwards, then backwards. Right, we haven't set up the event listener, of course. So let's do that. So we'll do button previous, and the function it's going to run is handle previous. Save that, refresh the page. Let's see, we go forward, we go back. That's great. As you can see, the next thing for us to look at is what if we reach the end of the slides, okay? Now, of course, the answer is very simple to that. Now, you probably figured this out already, but all we do is we loop around. So we need to know how many slides we have so that we can loop around them, right? Okay, let me delete this uncommented code, which we don't need. Also, let me organize this stuff a little bit. I'm going to add the event listeners at the bottom after we define all of functionality. So here we're grabbing elements. Here we have our functionality. Here we add the event listeners. Okay, we need to loop around, which means we need to know how many slides we have in our HTML, okay? So what we're going to do is, I just deleted the slides container. That's fine. I think the way we're going to do it, instead of, there are two ways we can do it, right? We can grab the slides container and we can see how many direct children do you have, or we can give a data attribute to each slide. Okay, now there are pros and cons as to which way you want to do it. If you grab the parent container, that's nice because you only grab one element and you count the children. It's one data attribute. But the problem is, what if someone accidentally puts something here, right? And then your JavaScript won't work anymore. It will count too many children or something. Then instead, you may want to grab every one of these and count those instead, if that makes sense. I think we're going to go the simpler way. We already have the thing here. So we're going to grab that thing again. I'm going to call it slides container as it was before. And we have data carousel slides container here. We take it again. And we are going to count the number of children. Okay, so we're going to have, what are we going to have? We're going to have something like const number of slides, right? So num slides equals, we're going to grab our slides container, right? And we're going to say something along the lines, what is it? Children, I don't remember the exact, let's see here, returns an HTML collection of child elements. Okay, children.length or something is what we want, something like this. So here let me just console.log, make sure we have the code. No, I'm not completely messing up over here. Console.log, console.long is not defined, that's fine. Okay, so we have 3. So it's counting the number of slides correct. Cool. So of course, what we want to do here is we want to loop around, right? So, we're at slide 0, then we add 1, we're on slide index 1, then we add another slide index 2. After we add another one, we don't want to go to slide index 3 because we don't have that 4th slide. We want to go back to 0, okay? So what we do is we have current slide equals current slide plus 1, and then we use the modulo operator, right? So percentage num slides. Now I believe that should work correctly. Yes, that's perfect. So that loops around properly. The issue is it doesn't seem to work when we go negatively. Okay. So if we do this -1, we go negative. As you can see, it messes up straight away. Okay, and that's because if I console.log what's happening here, right? We're at -1. We should be at 2, right? We shouldn't be at -1. So it's not a true modulo operator as it would be in mathematics. It doesn't handle negatives too well. So, we have to deal with that. We need to do something like this, unfortunately. So we say we do this, right? But it could go negative. So we say something like if current slide is less than 0, current slide add plus equals the number of slides we have. So if it's at 0 and it goes to -1, right? So it will be less than 0. It should be 2, right? So we will add, -1, we will add 3 to that, the number of slides, and it will be the correct number. It's going to be 2. Now, so, let's try this out. This should work fine. As you can see, that works fine, both forward and backwards. That's exactly what we want. That's great. As a little cleanup here, I'm just going to extract this function and actually create a modulo function for this file. So I'll just call it function modulo. And let's see, what is it going to be? So it's going to take the number, the resulting number, and then it's going to take the, I don't know what to call this, I'll just call it mod, something like that. And it's basically going to be this code, okay? So let's see, so we're going to have let result equals number percentage mod, right? So that's basically what we have here. We have number percentage mod, num slides in this case. And we have this if statement right underneath it, right? So if result is less than 0, then result plus equals mod. We just replaced the variable current slide, right, with result, and num slides with mod. That's all we kind of have here. And at the end, of course, we need to return the thing. So here we can do current slide equals modulo. What do we have here? We have current slide -1. That's like the resulting number before the modulo is taken. And then mod, which is going to be num slides. So we replace it with that. And then here, up here is, well, we don't need to do it up here, but since we have the function, here it's the same thing except +1. So let's try this. Okay, and we are working fine. That's great. Yeah, so the last thing that we need to do here, other than the styling, which looks horrible right now, is what if we have multiple carousels on the page, okay? So as it stands right now, it's not going to work. Let me showcase that. So we're going to come here. I'm going to take this carousel. I'm going to just copy it, all of it, and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, you can see 2 carousels. Now, if I click on these buttons, nothing is happening. If I click here, it's working fine. And the reason for that is because over here, query selector only grabs the first of the elements that it passes for. So here, where we have like carousel, it will only grab the first one. Okay, it's not going to grab the second one. So the first carousel works, the second and any other on the page do not. Obviously, we need to fix that. The different carousels on the page should be independent. So how do we do this? Here is how. Basically, we need to grab its carousel to start with because, well, that's like the parent, right? We need to do our stuff, everything we're doing here, we need to do it for its carousel. So here, we're going to say carousels. We're going to grab all of them. We're going to use query selector all. So it grabs every one of these. Now, for every one of these that it's grabbed, we need to get like here where we're getting the button, we can't get the first one of these it finds on the page. It needs to get the button from inside the particular carousel. Okay, so we're going to do something like this. We're going to create, just bear with me for now, I'll explain it in a sec. But let's create a function here, set up carousel, where we will take the parent carousel element. Okay, so parent let's just call it parent element. I'll just call it parent. Parent is good. We'll take that. Then we will take everything we have here, we'll delete it, and we will put it in here. But now, instead of searching for button previews on the document, we're going to search for button previews in the parent. Okay, so what this does, like, our JavaScript picks up these two carousel elements. Okay, so this is an array, right, containing this element and this element. Now here, if the parent, right, we will pass in that element. We're going to do something like carousels.forEach set up carousel. So what this is going to do is for every one of those elements, it's going to call setup carousel with that element. It's going to call something like setup carousel element 1 and setup carousel element 2. Something like that is what's going to happen here. And here we're doing parent.querySelector. So the query selector is only going to work, it's only going to search within this element. So it's going to find this one here, right? Data carousel button previews inside this. And then for the second carousel, same thing. It's going to start searching in here, and it's going to find the button here, right? It's not going to find the one in the other carousel up here. Okay, so that's what that does. So we need to replace document for parent everywhere. Okay. And I believe just from that, we should be ready to go. So as before, let me put this stuff on the bottom, I'm thinking, run our code after, and let's just give it a go. So we refresh, and let's see, carousel is not defined. On line 15, what have we got here? Carousel, yes, that's because we've called this parent now. We're no longer calling it carousel, right? We're calling it parent. So I think I'll just rename this to carousel so that our previous code here also hopefully works. Let's try again. Okay, this is working fine. This is working fine. Perfect. Now, if you're quite new to JavaScript, this might be a little bit confusing. Okay, it's to do with closures and scope. So basically, everything we have in here, right? We have this const button previews, const button next. Let me see, for different calls of setup carousel. So if we have like carousel 1, we have carousel 2, we can have as many of these as we want. For this call, right, it calls this function. This stuff, button previews, button next, slides container, only exists inside this one function. It doesn't affect the other one. In the other one, it's going to have a separate set of button previews, button next, slides container. Okay? So that's how it works. Yeah, and then of course these functions here, they access, right, this carousel, they access the one like for this function call. I understand it might be a bit confusing, but that's how closures work. If you don't like the syntax, if it's too complicated, we can do it a different way. We can do it like this. Hopefully, if you don't understand closures properly, it will make a bit more sense. So let's try it like this instead. It's basically equivalent to a class. Say we have a class carousel, I don't know, let's just call it that for now. Now in this class, in the constructor, we would take the parent as we have before. This should look familiar to what we have here because it is, right? It's the same thing. And we would say something like this.parent equals parent. We would also have all of this stuff. So I will just copy this. All of these things here, I'm going to copy them in here. And we would say, okay, let me just indent them a bit. So we would say this dot button previews equals parent dot query, something like that, right? This dot button next, hit here, this dot slides container equals, wait, I called this carousel here, then yeah, that, let me do that, let me do the same. Yeah. So let's say this dot carousel. Anyway, so now in our, we have our state for every instance. If you understand classes, hopefully this makes sense. We take our methods that we have here, right? Handle next and handle previous. And we put them here as methods, of course. So it doesn't have the function keyword, it's just that, right? Something like this, except this is, what do we have? We have this dot current slide, of course, and this dot thingy, this dot that, blah, blah. You know how it works, right? Classes, right? We no longer have consts, we have this everywhere. Here, we still have the carousels, but instead of doing this, carousels.forEach, we still do a similar thing. We do carousels.forEach. So for each carousel element, right, we create a new class, a new carousel, carousel element. Okay. And actually what we haven't done yet is we haven't done the setup, the event listeners. We would also do those here in the constructor. So we would have, what would we have? We'd have this dot button previous and this dot button next. This dot handle previous and this dot handle next. And of course, JavaScript being JavaScript with its that's finicky binding stuff. We actually need to do dot bind this here. So let's give that a go. I hope it doesn't fail with 1,000 errors. Let's see. Okay, carousel 1 is not defined, right? Yeah, this code won't work. Let's delete that. Slides container is not defined. Yes, we need this dot slides container. Modulo is not defined, right? Yes, modulo can stay out of the class. It can be a simple utility function. So let's put it up here. Yeah, speaking of which, it could actually stay out of the setup carousel also. Current slide, yep. Okay, so a lot of this, forgetting to add this. So I'm gonna do this off screen, add this we're missing from, the conversion, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, and we're back. I was missing a few of this, like this one here, and so on. But as you can see, everything is working fine. So I did this for demonstration purposes to show you this thing here is exactly like the class down here. The class has its state that belongs to its instance, and it has these methods that, uses the state from that class. Similarly up here, by creating a function out here, we can hold state internally in its function call. So as we said before, setup carousel 1 and setup carousel 2, they both hold different state, just like the class. Okay, so that's it for the demonstration. I'm actually going to, I guess I won't delete the code, I'll just comment it out. It can be here if you want to reference it later. And comment this out as well. And we'll go back to our function version, okay? So delete this. Let's double check again that everything's working. Okay, cool, so that's it. The basic functionality for our carousel is now finished. It looks awful, of course. So think what I'll do is I'm going to copy some images and some HTML and some styling and stuff. I won't bore you through that, I'll just show you the end result. So be right back. Okay, so here we are. I added some content over here. So you can see the slides now look like this. Now, here's what it was basically. I added in each slide, and the reason why I'm not showing you all of this is because it doesn't matter what's in here. The carousel will work with whatever you want to put in here, right? And you can take whatever size you want it to take, whatever height you want it to take. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I put in a div to contain the content. I put here a text container to make it like small for this piece of text. It doesn't really matter. Couple of headings, couple of paragraphs, as you can see. So that's over here. And also an image. And I've done that 3 times, basically. They all have, the same content. Now, the images are background images. Right, if we go through the content div first, full width, center it, give it a tiny bit of padding. And here is where we also put the background image. So if you see here, we have Cookie the Poem, which is an Unsplash image. All of these are Unsplash images. They're really awesome. And, well, there they are. They cover the div, right? And we have them to cover, which means that they cover the entire div that they are put inside. And we have them centered. Okay, so like, you know how it works, right? If we put not centered, but let's not give it a position, it will be, you see it's not centered, right? Stuff like that, really. Not very much. And then in the text container, we just made that a little bit smaller. We've given it a padding, so you can see there is a little bit of padding here. And we've given it a little background color, a little like dark background, so that it's actually nice and readable. And then the image, actually I don't have an image anymore. I had it when I was sort of playing with this. So we can actually delete that. So pretty simple styling there. Which brings us to the end of the basic functionality. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is extremely important. It's necessary if you're going to work in any company, large or small, and that is accessibility. Accessibility is a legal requirement. All web developers really need to know it. So that's what we're going to cover next. The very basics, first of all, are that the carousel should be usable with the keyboard. Okay, so if we tab, we see we have the outline there. We have the outline there, and we can press space, pressing the space key, and it's working. Press enter, and it's working. Same thing with that. Okay, so that's fine. Now we get that for free. That's because our buttons, and let me tidy this up a bit. Let me just close the slides. That's because our buttons are legitimate buttons. If they were div, okay, it wouldn't necessarily be working like that. For starters, we wouldn't be able to select them when tabbing. Actually, let me make this a little bit bigger. It messes it up a little bit because everything is so big, but don't worry. I haven't done like overflows and stuff. I haven't made it fully responsive. Let's focus just on the carousel. But if you look, if I tab, it's selectable, but if we had a div, it wouldn't be selectable. We would have to do extra work to make it tabbable like this. So we get this for free as using a button. This is quite nice. The other thing we have to do, unfortunately, can be quite complicated. We have to make sure that it works well with a screen reader. Now, a lot of people have never used screen readers before, so this may be a bit, unusual, but let's see how it goes. I'll try to show you what the website will currently sound like using a screen reader. All right, so I'm using the screen reader NVDA, which is a free screen reader for Windows. And of course, you can get them for any operating systems. So that we don't get confused, I'm going to delete the heading because it's going to read out the heading. I want you to see what it sounds like just with what we have here, without the heading or anything else to get in the way. So here's what I'll do. I'll refresh the page. I'll turn on the screen reader.
Speech mode beep. Speech mode talk.
Okay, and I'll refresh the page and pay attention to what it sounds like.
Carousel. Heading level 2 am works. Lorem ipsum dolor. Sit amat consec tetra adip.
So basically, if you're not familiar with this, let me explain what has happened. So let me turn it off.
Speech mode off.
It read the HTML title up here, and then it went straight into reading the content that we have here. Now, one thing that might not be obvious unless we listen to it for a while, because we have a lot of content here, is that it will read the content on this slide, and then it will straight away move on to the content of this one, and then the content of this. It will keep going, basically, until it's done. Now, to showcase this, let me just make 2 more slides that basically have almost nothing in them. Let me give them the text, heading 2. Hello will be the first one. okay, and a heading 2 of goodbye. And now let's listen again. And basically just notice that it says hello, then it says like goodbye, and then it keeps going.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
Okay, I turn the screen reader on and I'm going to refresh the page.
Carousel. Button. Heading level 2 hello. Heading level 2 goodbye. Heading level 2 best frameworks. Speech mode off.
Okay, and so on. So it reads everything. So the first thing we want to do is we want to hide the, if you think of the visual experience, right? We see one slide at a time. That's the same thing we want for the screen reader. So we want to hide it. We want to hide everything except the current slide we're on. Okay, so how we do this? Let me see. Should I leave these on for you to kind of see the effect? I think I'll just leave these on. They look ugly, but it's okay. But what we do is we use the attribute aria hidden. Okay, and I think we have to make it true here. So we use aria hidden true as the attribute here. And I'm going to basically copy this and put it for the other divs as well. Okay, so now we've made everything aria hidden true, okay, except for this slide. So I'll turn it on again. Let's see what it sounds like.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
Okay, I'll refresh.
Carousel. Button. Heading level 2 hello.
You see, so it reads this,
Index
and then it stops. Oop, let me turn it off.
Speech mode off.
Yeah, so, that's how we need to do it. Now, obviously, that means that in our JavaScript, we need to be adding those attributes whenever we change slide. Okay, so if we go to the handle, to the next slide, well, really regardless of which slide we're on, we need to make sure every other one is hidden. Now, how I'm going to do that is, like, if we're in handle next, we're going to the next slide. We want to hide the previous one, and we want to unhide the current one. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's see, so we have the current slide, okay, and we have the previous slide. Right now, before we change current slide on this line, this is the previous slide we were on. So what we're going to say is slides container dot, index current slide, dot children, right? Dot children index current slide. Okay, so we're getting the current slide before we change to the next one. And we need to hide it. So what we do is dot set attribute, what is it? Aria hidden with a value of true, okay? And then after we change slide, we need to unhide the current slide. So we do slides container dot children current slide, set attribute aria hidden false. Okay, so now to show you the effect, let's see what happens. So I'm gonna turn on screen
Speech
reader.
mode beeps. Speech mode talk. Carousel. Button. Heading level 2 hello.
Okay, so it reads hello.
Button.
Actually, it's not going to read anything, is it? Because we don't have aria-live yet. But if we just look at the code.
Menu selected. Carousel doc. Speech mode off.
Okay, so we can see here aria hidden false. That's what we want. Okay, and then of course we want a similar thing for this, but like in reverse, right? So over here, yeah, basically exactly the same thing, but in reverse. So there's that. And now if we try it, we're looking at the code. And let's see, so the first one is fine. We go to the next one. This one hides, this one doesn't hide. We go previous. This one isn't hidden anymore. This one's hidden. Okay, so we're working fine. I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to extract these into their own function, because this is full duplication at this point. Okay, so let's have function change slide, and let's have a slide number. Okay, like the slide to change to. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab like all of this stuff. And also let's use some variables, because this is quite difficult to understand. Let's say const previous slide. Okay. Well, one step at a time. Let's do it like this. So let's do const new current slide. I have something in my head. Okay, we'll do this. We'll do current slide is this, and then we'll do change slide to the new current slide. I think let's do it this way, and then we delete this stuff. Okay, so we'll do it like this. So now, because of this code, we don't know we don't know if we went next or we went previous, if that makes sense. So with previous, we would subtract here, right? We don't know if we're going to the next slide or the previous slide or whatever. So what we need to do is we need to disable both the slide before and the slide after. So we're going to say const previous slide number equals modulo slide number, the current slide, well, the slide we're going to, -1 with the num slides, and next slide number will be this +1. Okay, and then we need to get the actual slide. So const previous slide, so this is the previous slide element, right, equals what was it, slides container dot children previous slide number, right? And then we have next slide, and that is with the next slide number. And then what we want to do is we want to say, well, exactly as we have here. So we want to say previous slide, disable it, next slide, disable it, and then current slide, we've already done this line up here, so we don't need this anymore. And then current slide, enable it. Okay, actually we need to get the current slide as well, don't we? So let's go here, current slide. Right, I've already used this element, haven't I? I'll just call this current slide element for now, and that will be the slide number is what we're using over here. Yes, so then we'll say basically enable, so aria hidden false, don't hide it, enable the current slide. Okay, so that will be that, and then also current slide slide number is the one we're using in this function. So we'll have it like that. Now it may look messy, but you know, we could extract this into its own function, which is like hide next and previous slides, but I think I'll just leave it in here for now. So, you know, we're hiding and showing the things successfully. We move on to the other accessibility things we need to do. So whenever it comes to any accessibility work, particularly for JavaScript widgets, for things that aren't native HTML elements, we need to look at the document, the Y aria authoring practices. So this is it here. Now this is a massive document. Now I would like to see the sidebar, so I'm actually going to increase the size of this a little bit. We're doing a carousel. The carousel is right here. So we click on this. We come here and basically we have to follow all the directions that we're given, because as you remember when I showed you what it sounds like, nothing notifies the user of the screen reader that this is a carousel, this is a slide, you can change to the next and previous slide, right? All it says, it says button, right? Our button, if we go here, the button doesn't even have any text, right? It's just it's just an icon. So all it says is button, and then it goes right into the content. So we need to follow these steps here so it makes sense for the screen reader. So basically here we go. If you want, you can read this in your own time. What we're going to do for now is we're just going to follow these instructions, basically. Okay, so let's see here. A carousel container, I'm going to lose the sidebar now actually to make it easy to work. Okay, so a carousel container element basically needs to have a role of region or group. Okay, so let's start with that. Now, you can look into this in your own time, but a region is like a section, and a group is like, well, not a section. So in our case, our carousel isn't a section really. It can be placed inside the section. That's an HTML section. For that reason, we're going to give it a role of group. Again, that's not the section one. And we need to give it an aria role description of carousel. Okay, so that's aria role over here, aria role group, and aria, role description of carousel. Okay, so now straight away, if I refresh this page, you will hear that this is actually a carousel. Now you're going to hear the HTML title carousel, but then you're going to hear it again to signify that like the content we're looking at is a carousel. Here it goes.
Carousel, carousel button, heading level, speech mode off.
Okay, so turn it off. So we heard carousel, the HTML title, then we heard carousel, the element, and then we heard the button, this button, right? It kind of goes like that. So the next thing to do is to give a label to the carousel. Okay, so for example, that, say the carousel was about cars or something. It was like a carousel of cars, or maybe student testimonials or something. Do aria label equals student testimonials, something like this. Okay, so that's that. Now the rotation, the controls have to be native button elements, which we've done. So, we're done for this one. Now the rotation control has an accessible label, because as we saw, it just calls this button. Okay, it doesn't say anything else. So on the actual buttons themselves, we need to add aria label equals next slide. Sorry, this is the previous one. So we need to add previous slide. And over here, we add next slide. Okay, so let's listen once again.
Speech mode beeps, speech mode talk. Carousel, student testimonials carousel button previous slide, heading level 2 hello. Speech mode off.
Okay, so I hope you can hear that already sounds a lot better. I actually messed up. It read previous slide button twice because this is supposed to be next slide. But straight away, you can see now a screen reader user knows what's going on, right? Let's keep going. Okay, this next one isn't applicable for this tutorial because we don't have an auto-rotating carousel. Okay, we're clicking the buttons ourselves. So we skip this one. Now each slide container has a role group with the property set to slide. Yeah, so this one is going to take a while, but we have to do it. We need to do, aria role equals group and aria role description equals slide. And unfortunately, we have to do this for every one of these. Okay, this will take a little while to change. I'll resume the video when we've done it. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so that's all done now. Now I've left this one in one line so that it's actually visible when minimized, but they're all like this basically. Next, each slide has an accessible name. Okay, so here we can either give every slide basically an aria label, right? Just like we did for the entire carousel. However, in general, well, in this case, our slides have headings. Okay, so here we have the heading to hello, and of course this could be, if it's a student, right? Say we have a student testimonial slide, it could be, I don't know, Bob. Okay, and the next one could be Alice. Okay, so since we have a heading, that can act as our label. Now, how we do labels like this that already exist, we don't need to copy them, right? Aria label Bob. We don't need to do that. Instead, we can use aria labeled by. Okay, and then we point to an ID. So we need to give this an ID of Bob, I suppose. This points to that ID of Bob. Okay, and down here as well, we give Alice an ID of Alice, or of course it can be anything, right? And then aria labeled by Alice. All right. Now I'm not going to do the rest, but you get the idea. This is the process you would go through. And I think with that, we are basically done. All right. Sorry. No, one last thing. As it says here, aria-live. Okay. So I'll come to that in a second. Let's see what we've got so far. I'll turn
Speech
on the
mode
screen
beeps.
reader.
Speech mode talk.
All right, and let's hear it.
Carousel. Student testimonials carousel button previous slide. Button next slide. Slide heading level 2 bob out of slide. Slide heading level 2 best frameworks. Lorem ipsum dolor, sit amat consec teter adipising elit. Vel ducimus fuge. Speech mode off.
Okay, it looks like I might have messed up somewhere here because it's reading the other slides. Yeah, so on this one in particular, it's supposed to be aria hidden true. My mistake on that one, but you get the idea. You saw that it was very descriptive now for a screen reader user. Now the last thing, if I just refresh.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk. Carousel. Student testimonials
Okay, I'm going to stop it talking. Now if we change slide.
Next slide button. Previous slide button.
We get that, but we don't get the content of the last slide.
Speech mode off.
Turning it off. This is what aria-live does. And aria-live is very important with updating elements like this. Okay, so what we do, as you can see here, is we need to set the thing that we need to reread, so to speak. We set aria-live property. Okay, now there are 3 levels, as you can see right here on VS Code: off, polite, and assertive. Okay, now we want polite. Okay, what off does is it doesn't update anything. That's what we have now. What assertive does is it always updates no matter what you're doing, and it interrupts the user. Now that is not what a carousel should do, right? Because a user is doing their thing, and then they may look at the carousel when it updates, right? But the carousel shouldn't demand the attention. So we have polite. Polite will not interrupt the screen reader reading, right? But if the screen reader isn't doing anything, then it will read it will read out the updated content. Okay, yeah, 2 things. So first of all, let's see what this sounds like now.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
And we click next slide.
Next slide button. Alice.
You see, it says the content.
Best frameworks lorem ipsum dolor, sit amat consec teter. Lorem ipsum dolor.
Okay, I'm going to stop it talking.
Speech mode off.
That's perfect, right? That's exactly what we want. Now, just a quick final note about aria-live. Just note that it's triggered when the content changes. That means like the actual content, like text and images and stuff. Okay, so if it changes, if you add some more text, if you remove some text and so on, it will trigger an aria-live update. It will also be triggered when you change the aria hidden property. So that's what we're doing in our carousel, right? In the JavaScript, every time the user presses the next button, we change aria hidden. And it's also triggered if you change something from like CSS display none to CSS display block or something like that. So with those 3 things. Yeah, so just something to remember in case, I don't know, your aria-live isn't triggering or something like that. And that brings us to the end of the accessibility section as well, which brings us into the last section, which is testing. So let's talk a little bit about that now. So how would we test this? And I don't have great news here. The summary of it, if you want to skip the discussion, is that I would personally write end-to-end tests for this, not unit tests. An end-to-end test, by the way, pretends like it's like a user clicking through your program and checking that the correct things are happening. A unit test like tests a particular function in your code or something like that. So the reason I would write an end-to-end test is because we could ask the end-to-end test. We can be like, okay, load the page, click next. Is Alice the only thing that's displayed on the screen? Okay, and if it is, of course, the test passes. And if it's not, then the test doesn't pass. So for example, if we have a little bit of this slide as well, then the test would fail. Now I like these tests because they test that the end result is working. Okay, let's go back to a unit test. This is a function that you could easily unit test. And I would unit test this. You would do something like this. Depending on your test framework, you're going to have something like this to write a unit test. Like expect modulo called with, I don't know, 10 and 2, right? So the result of that function call should be 0. Okay, and you might have another one where you have like 11 and 2, and the result should be 1. So this is the kind of tests you would write, and this is good. And you can do this because this returns a result. It's easy to test this the way we just saw. I think I'll just leave this on the screen for you to look at, but comment them out. Now this, how do you test this? First of all, because this is a function where like all our functions are like in here hidden, nothing is returned, you can't test this, right? You can't like test this function because it's contained in here. Okay. Now you might say, okay, one of the things you can do is you can extract, right? Like you can take this function, you can extract it out here. Of course, you know, it no longer has access to its scope. So now you need to accept current slide over here. You also need to extract the rest because it doesn't know what this is, right? This is another function that's hidden in there. You get the idea. You can extract them. You can call them like this from your code. So you might say, okay, you're able to unit test this. But like, what exactly would you unit test? Like, you're gonna have to heavily test implementation details. Like, okay, is current slide like the correct number? You can't really unit test this. Maybe you can unit test the class where you can go in and you can see, you know, this dot current slide. What is that value? So that's out. I think you just shouldn't do that. It's way too complex for no benefit. The other thing you might be able to unit test though, so to speak, unit test, you can run the code and then you can sort of make your code like click the next button. You would do this by like manually dispatching an event. You would create some mock HTML, right, in your test, and you would put it on some environment like JS DOM. If you're using test, you would simulate an event on the button, okay? And then you would check something like, you would query the HTML and you would say something like, does this div, the div with the carousel, have the style current slide 1? That's how you could unit test that. And that is an acceptable way to do it. But the problem is that you could be getting false positive tests, because even if your tests are passing, even if you've said on your tests, does it have this property? Your CSS might be like current slide 20 or current slide number here instead. And your code will be running and your tests will be passing, but your carousel won't be working, if you know what I mean. Like, I've changed the code over here. Let me, you know, obviously you would change this as well. Current slide number. Now, the carousel isn't working. The code is running. Your tests would be passing because indeed the JavaScript is setting this property, which is what you would be checking on your tests. But the end result isn't working, okay? And that is why I don't like these tests. These tests, because they don't actually, you know, they check, does the code do, does the JavaScript specifically do what I think it's doing? And the answer is yes, but things may still be broken, right? The CSS may not be doing what the JavaScript is doing, like so to speak. So that's why I don't like those tests. They don't give you confidence that the end result actually works correctly. Only end-to-end tests do that. Now that doesn't mean they're completely useless. What they actually do is, have I fixed this yet? Let's see, yes. If you see, you come to the browser and you see, okay, my carousel is obviously working. I'm happy. So you might say, let me freeze the implementation. Let me write a test so that, like, you know, that checks, is this property being set? So then no one can accidentally change it tomorrow. Okay. So as we said, this doesn't give you confidence. You've gained the confidence from looking at the browser, but it freezes the implementation. It means that tomorrow no one can like do this because now your test is going to break. Okay. Now, personally, I don't really like those types of tests, because it means if you want to change the implementation tomorrow, you're going to have to change the CSS, the JavaScript, and all your tests. You're going to have like 10 tests. You need to change the implementation. Okay. And that may happen because when we were first developing this, we weren't using this solution. We were directly setting like transform X, right? Sorry, translate X. So, you may come back tomorrow and you may say, I want to change the implementation of this to something more performant. And now you have to change 10 tests on top of that. And that's why I don't like it. But on the other hand, if you're just using the end-to-end solution, the end-to-end testing, and you change the implementation tomorrow, like if it works, you're finished. You don't have to go and change 10 other tests. So it's up to you. If you really want to freeze the implementation to prevent accidental problems, feel free to unit test this, no problem. My personal recommendation, however, would be to end-to-end test it for the reasons I talked about. As for actually how to do end-to-end tests, unfortunately, we're not going to go into this in this video because this video is already way too long, and end-to-end testing can be quite involved, right? So I would recommend have a look at something like Cypress or another end-to-end testing framework in your own time. Maybe do an end-to-end testing course or something at some point. And then, the kind of end-to-end test you would write should hopefully be fairly simple for you at that point. And that's it. That was a hugely long video. But I hope the things we spoke about made sense. I hope you can see how, as a professional developer, you would do this in your own work, working for a big company or anyone. So yeah, I hope you find it useful. I hope you liked it. If you did, please click the like button. If you want to see more videos like this that we'll release, then please subscribe. And if you have any comments, any feedback, anything maybe we could have done a bit better here, anything we missed, and that kind of stuff, then please leave a comment below. All right, thanks very much, and see you next time.